Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dental Coffee Time. Today we're going to dive into something that's, well, it's one of the most frustrating moments in all of aesthetic dentistry. It's that sinking feeling when a case looks absolutely perfect on the model, but then you put it in the mouth and it's slanted. We are going to break down exactly why this happens, and most importantly, how you can make sure it never ever happens to you again. So here's what we've got on tap. First, we'll set the scene for this, super common failure. Then we're going to play detective a little bit and figure out what's really going on. After that, we'll walk through how the techniques to fix this have evolved, dig into the cool science of why our eyes are so darn good at spotting this mistake, and then we'll wrap it all up with the one big idea you need to remember: mastering facial context. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with a scenario that I'm pretty sure many clinicians out there have either lived through or at least had nightmares about. So picture this. You've just seated a beautiful set of anterior crowns. I mean, everything was perfect, the preps were clean, the margins are totally sealed, the shade is just a work of art. You feel great, you proudly hand the mirror to the patient, and then you see their smile just drop a little. And they say, they look kind of tilted, don't they? In that single moment, your heart just plummets because you look again and you realize they're right. The whole smile is slanted. Ugh, it's just an absolutely gut-wrenching feeling. And that's the crazy part, isn't it? It's this huge paradox. You can do every single clinical step perfectly. Your lab tech can be an absolute wizard. And still, you're staring at a major aesthetic failure. And what's that first instinct? For a lot of us, it's to pick up the phone and call the lab, right? Like, what happened here? But what if the lab isn't really the one to blame? All right, so let's put on our detective hats for a minute, because if we don't truly get to the bottom of this, we're just going to be stuck in the same loop. Understanding the real cause is the only way to stop it from happening again. So even though we might first point the finger at the lab tech, the real culprit in almost every single one of these cases is something much more basic. It's the patient's own naturally canted or tilted occlusal plane that we just didn't communicate. See, the mistake isn't on the plaster model itself. The mistake is in the huge disconnect between that flat 2D model and the living, breathing 3D reality of the patient's face. Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, how this mistake just gets baked right into the process. Your technician gets the model, and they see the prep teeth are clearly on a slant. Now, they don't have the patient's face in front of them, right? So what do? The most logical thing possible. They level it on their workbench. They correct the slant they see on the model. But, and here's the tragic irony, when that perfectly level restoration goes back into the patient's mouth, which has that natural slant, it just recreates the problem perfectly. The lab's attempt to fix it is actually what guarantees the slanted result. It's wild. Okay, so now we know what the problem is and why it happens, so let's get to the good stuff. How do we actually fix this? The good news is there's been a really clear evolution in techniques that takes us away from that chairside nightmare and moves us toward real, predictable precision. You can really think about it in 3 stages. There's let's call it the hard way, the old school method of trying to fix it right there in the mouth. Then there's a much better, more precise analog way. And finally, we have the modern, almost foolproof digital workflow. So, method 1. This is the trial by fire. You pop in the temporary bridge, you see the slant, and you just let out this big sigh, because you know the next hour of your life is going to be a grind. And I mean literally. You're grinding down the high side, you're globbing on resin on the low side, just trying to eyeball a level plane while your patient is sitting there waiting. It is so stressful, it's super inefficient, and it all comes down to how good your artistic eye is on that particular day. Yeah, you can make it work, but man, that is no way to practice predictably. Okay, now let's talk about a much, much better way to do this: the analog bite registration. Seriously, this is a game changer. So after you've prepped, you take your bite registration material, lay it over the teeth, and now this is the most important part. You have to get up and position yourself directly in front of the patient, what we call the 6 o'clock position. From there, you can actually see their whole face. Now you use their lips as your guide, and you gently shape that material until the edge you're creating is perfectly parallel with their interpupillary line. That imaginary line that runs right between their pupils. Once that's set, you take a tool and scribe 3 super important vertical lines, one for the true facial midline, and then one for each nostril. What you've just created is a physical 3D roadmap of the patient's face that you can send to the lab. No more guesswork. And that brings us to the modern way, which is all about using tech to just get rid of any and all confusion. It's actually pretty simple. First, you take a full-face photo of your patient, giving a nice, relaxed smile. Then, with either the temps or wax try-in in place, you take a separate, retracted intraoral photo. Now for the magic, you just use a simple software program, and I'm not talking about anything fancy here. You can literally do this in PowerPoint or Keynote, and you overlay the two pictures. The key is to line them up using the pupils as your anchor points. Once they're snapped together, you just draw a perfectly straight horizontal line through the pupils and a vertical line for the facial midline. You save that picture, email it to your technician, and boom, it's clear, it's precise, it's the ultimate communication tool. Zero ambiguity. So we've talked about the problem and how to fix it clinically, but I want to go a little deeper into something more fundamental, the science behind it all. Like, why are our brains, and more importantly, our patients' brains, so unbelievably good at picking up on this specific mistake? What makes a tiny 1 or 2 millimeter slant look so wrong? Well, it all comes down to something called aesthetic perception. Our brains are basically pattern recognition machines, and they are hardwired to notice when something breaks that pattern. And there was this absolutely fantastic research paper from a team in Brazil that actually put numbers to this, specifically for dentistry. They wanted to find out what is the exact point, the exact threshold, where everyday people, not dentists, start to notice that a smile is slanted. And their experiment was so clever and simple. They took a photo of a really nice, ideal smile, and then they digitally messed with it, creating versions where the midline was slanted by 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 5 millimeters. Then they showed these pictures to 2 different groups of regular folks. Group 1 got to see the smile with all the normal facial cues around it, the lips, the nose, the chin. But Group 2, they only saw the smile and the lips, totally isolated. And the results were, wow, they were fascinating. For the group that could see the whole face, they could consistently spot a slant of just 1 millimeter. 1. But now, get this. For the group that only saw the lips, without the nose and chin as reference points, their ability to see the slant was cut in half. The threshold jumped all the way to 2 millimeters. So what does that tell us? It means the face itself, those landmarks, provides the critical context that literally makes our brains twice as good at spotting this mistake. But they didn't stop there. They wanted to know when the slant stops being just something I can see and starts being something I don't like. And they found it. The tipping point was an average of 4.17 millimeters. At that point, people started actively rating the smile as unattractive. Now that is an incredibly powerful number for us as clinicians. It draws a clear line in the sand. It tells us exactly when a small asymmetry crosses over into being a real aesthetic failure from the patient's point of view. So when you pull it all together, you have the clinical problem, you have the technical solutions, and now you have the science of perception, you start to see that they're all pointing to one single, massive, unifying idea for aesthetic success. And here it is, the big takeaway. Successful aesthetic dentistry is not about making perfect teeth in a vacuum on an isolated model. It is 100% about understanding, capturing, and then communicating the entire facial context to your lab. The teeth don't exist on their own. They have to live in harmony with the face. And our most important job, our most critical role, is to be the bridge that carries that information from the patient to the technician. So let's just hammer home the key takeaways one last time. First, you've got to be on the lookout for that canted occlusal plane. It's a super common trap. Next, just make it a rule. Never ever send an anterior case to the lab without giving them a horizontal and a midline reference, period. Use either that analog bite jig or a simple digital photo workflow to make your communication foolproof. And remember, your patients can see errors as small as 1 millimeter, so precision really matters. And finally, the most important thing, your #1 job is to communicate facial context. That's the whole ballgame. And that just about wraps it up for today, but I want to leave you with a question to think about. We've talked a ton about the midline and the occlusal plane today, but I'm curious, beyond those big things, what's the one subtle aesthetic detail? You know, maybe it's the gum line, or the texture on the tooth, or the translucency of the edges. What's the one detail that you believe has the biggest impact on how beautiful a smile looks? I'd love to hear what you think, so drop your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. This is Dental Coffee Time. Bye.